Hello, and thanks for your interest in Strongpoint, the world's only change enablement company for Salesforce. The world's only solution that really enables anybody to make changes, even in production systems within their Salesforce environment. So at Strongpoint, we like to say that we enable safe innovation at velocity, but truly what I think we do is we inspire the confidence for people to move very, very quickly at speed, very, very safely. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of an introduction of me, give an overview of some common issues, and then we're going to do a quick overview and demonstration of the toolset itself. So my name is Rob Brown. I oversee the Strongpoint product for Salesforce. I come from Salesforce, and this is a problem that's been haggling Salesforce for a long, long time. The idea that there's really no change oversight or governance solution that's baked right into the platform. So this leads to some pretty bad issues. And a lot of organizations, especially mature organizations, they've become bloated with over-customization. And this whole idea of different consultants coming in, different regimes managing an instance or an org or a product without doing a lot of good solid documentation leads to a form of tech paralysis or a technical debt where new changes can't be made because nobody's really aware of the impact that they'll have on any other customizations or changes that have been made. And this is frustrating because it slows the business response and it leads to missed opportunities, and it actually drives a lot of friction between the dev team or the tech team and the business itself. So Strongpoint was designed to help offset or alleviate this, and it's really a set of tools and utilities and an application, a rules-based application that does risk assessment and predictive impact to address the fundamental barriers to risk, which are the technical risk. In other words, if I make a change, will there be a code collision? Will I break something either in my org or somewhere else, in my ERP system or my SEM system or what have you? So that's pretty straightforward. Most people are really focused on the technical risk, but they forget about the organizational risk. If I make a change that affects 1,000 users, how am I going to onboard those users? Maybe I need to slow down and think about what I'm going to do after I make the change. Or am I going to make a change that might impact a VIP or a very important individual who I don't want to have mad at me? And then finally, if I make a change, am I going to take the company out of compliance with SOX or with GDPR or ISO 606 or what have you? So we look at these three dimensions when we do risk assessment, and we expose that risk to people before they make the change. And so Salesforce customers really approach us for three reasons. Number one, their org is a mess, and this is really a function of the fact that there's three types of changes that you can make in Salesforce. You can add something which is really risk-free. You can enhance something which is fraught with a little bit more risk, but it's not as risky as deleting something. So the order of the day for most organizations is we're just going to add stuff. And you know what? There may be stuff there that we're duplicating, but rather than do the risk analysis of deleting that, we're just going to add stuff, and we're going to have maybe two, and very quickly the org gets very cluttered. So customers come to us because they want to understand what they can get rid of. They want to clean out the trash. They want to hose out the spider webs and the cobwebs, and they want to have a nice, tight, clean org. And then once they get that org in order, they want to be able to keep it in order. So our change enablement application absolutely helps put a process around getting the org in order and keeping it in order. And because we have that process, and because we treat everything as part of that process, it becomes very easy to prove that the org is in order. And so these are the three modules of our solution. To help get the org in order, we offer automated technical documentation and optimization. To help keep it in order, we put that application and that process around the whole process. And then finally, we offer org governance for Salesforce to help demonstrate to third parties or auditors that the org is in order. So customers come and they ask simple things like, how can I delete a field without worrying? How can I safely change a pick list? How can I determine what components of my org are being used and which aren't? I need to be alerted when changes are made that have any kind of impact at all. I need to ensure a graceful transition of resources. And we're seeing a lot of this lately with admins and devs. there's a talent shortage, and so people are moving around. They're not staying in orgs very long, and this leads to the idea of, hey, I can't get top talent, so I'm going to try to enable citizen development. I'm going to take some of my business folks and who understand the functional requirements of the solution, but maybe who are not coders. And but traditionally, this has been a real barrier for folks because there was no way for these people to come in and be effective because they didn't really understand a lot of the design patterns and good technical practices. So with a governance type of solution, you can really enable citizen development. And then finally, the biggest thing is, how do I set user expectations? If a user comes to me and they want something enhanced, I want to be able to tell them how long it's going to take and not just say, well, I'll get back to you when it's done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the first thing I want to do is help people understand how the solution works. And sophistication, speed requires sophistication. And so at Strongpoint, the first thing that we want to do is make sure that our running gear is in absolute order. So we start out with automated technical documentation, and that's really the foundation of our solution. And what we do here is we ingest metadata from the metadata API about the entire org. And anything that's a customization, we index as an individual change and assign it a record and a unique ID number. And we basically treat it as a record in the database. We capture metadata about it. We know who the owner is. We know when it's used. We know what type of change it was. And we can catalog and index these things inside of a database and filter them and start to really understand what we have in the database. On top of that, we have an algorithm that maps the dependencies between every single one of these components. So once we know all the components that we've got, it's pretty straightforward for the indexing engine to understand the relationships between the components. So we have this unique dependency mapping capability that's very unique to Strongpoint, and that's really our foundation. On top of that, we've got a rules engine which allows us to build applications that instantiate policy, and then based on policy, they can route changes to the appropriate resources, which is very, very different than the way folks are traditionally managing their Salesforce orgs right now. Traditionally, right now, there's one person who becomes a bottleneck who has absolute say over whether a change can be made or it can't. Or maybe it's a group of people. Maybe it's an architectural review board. Maybe it's a COE. But there's basically a bottleneck that does a risk assessment and then routes and then actually executes the change. In the Strongpoint world, the Strongpoint engine assesses for risk, and then based on the level of risk, it will associate that risk to a group and allocate that change to be made by that particular group or individual. And then finally, because the indexing is going on a continuous basis, anything that gets made, any change that gets made to that metadata indexing engine or that metadata repository is going to get caught and assessed by the same policy. So you can quickly see that anything that slipped through the cracks is going to get caught, and there'll be an alert to the appropriate resource if change was made and it was out of policy. So it really instantiates this idea of automagic audit and compliance. And again, this maps back to the three modules of the solution. So at the foundation, we have documentation and optimization. The application that helps keep things going in that order is ICE, Intelligent Change Enablement, and then the governance for Salesforce to really be able to prove to third parties, auditors, and regulatory folks that you're in compliance with not only internal policy, but also external policy. So again, the foundation is DocOp, and it starts with the automated metadata indexing process that can be run ad hoc, but is typically run on a 24-hour basis. Again, each one of the records here is treated as an individual customization, and all states of change are stored. And then from there we get into the dependency mapping and the DRD, or dependency relationship diagrammer, which is unique to Strongpoint. And all dependencies are mapped and correlated. They're exposed within a visual environment, and this visual environment, or this engine, is leveraged by Strongpoint to enforce policy. Moving up the stack, the Intelligent Change Enablement is again an application, and it helps you keep things in order. So understanding the simple changes versus complex changes on an ongoing basis is essential. We talked about routing them to the appropriate resources, and this really ensures collaboration between stakeholders, and make sure that nothing gets slipped through the crack. The policy engine ships, we have a default policy that ships with Strongpoint that can be extended or amended because we all are 100% Salesforce native, like I just said. And policies can be defined by any criteria. And then finally, they're routed on a workflow-based process. So every change that actually gets assessed for risk will be routed to the appropriate folks. So technical risk will be vetted by developers or technical people. Organizational impact will be vetted by the business, and compliance is ensured by a CISO or a regulatory team. And that's basically how the allocation of effort works in the default environment. And if you think about a traditional change management or change process, a change is defined, it's run through a COE or a one really smart person or whoever the risk assessment team is in the organization, and they may only meet once a month or twice a month, and this causes a bottleneck because they're the ones that know the policies, they're the ones that understand the risk, and if they need approval from the business or a VIP to make a change, they're the ones that have to go for it. Then they do their testing, and then obviously once they're satisfied, they'll deploy to production. And so this is a traditional sort of full CI/CD process in sort of a more traditionally code-driven world. In the declarative world of Salesforce, only about 18% of the changes really have to go through this rigorous process. So in our world, a change is defined, the policy is automatically located, and the appropriate control is put on it. So we find that about 60% of the changes can be done right in the declarative environment. So a citizen developer or an admin developer or somebody who has functional background can make these changes using Strongpoint because now they can document the impact of their changes. Sometimes, however, we want to have two sets of eyes on it. So you might have something that's a simple change, but you want to have it reviewed by a third party or a secondary resource to ensure that there's collaboration and they reach a common conclusion as to whether or not it can be promoted. And then finally, only about 18% of those sophisticated changes have to go into the full DevOps cycle, and that could be natively a solution like Capado, or it could be a third party like ServiceNow. You could be using Jira to open a ticket and push it into any number of full lifecycle development applications. And this is consistent with what Salesforce has always preached, which is clicks, not code. And they say only 5 to 10% of changes should require code. And that really does sum up the agility of Salesforce. And I just wanted to show this slide before we jump into the demo. In our demo, we have basically 4 levels of sophistication inside of our policy engine. So the first one, level 1, is the most simple, and that's log changes only. And that means that a change has been nominated, Strongpoint has assessed it, it's come back and says the risk is very limited, so we're just going to log the changes. We're going to go ahead and make that in production, but we're going to log the changes so that on an audit, we'll understand what the thinking was, or just the next person that has to come in and try to understand what change was made. The second level, level 2, is a change request. And this is exactly the same as a log changes decision, only we require a second set of eyes. So if there's organizational impact, it might get routed to a VP of operations for an OK. If it's something that requires approval from the executive committee, it's going to get queued up as a change request or a ticket. The third is submit to sandbox, and so this typically means that there's some level of technical risk that has to be addressed. So let's actually make the change in sandbox, do a limited amount of regression testing, and then promote it to production. And then level 4, of course, is your full CI/CD software development lifecycle phase. And so, as we talked about, the prevailing issues with a COE is it presents a natural bottleneck. It's comprised of experts with limited availability, lacks comprehensive visibility into the org, especially with regard to dependencies. and it can only deliver an opinion. And if you have a COE, even the smartest guys can only give you an opinion. They can't give you an absolute answer as to yes or no, this is going to break something, which is why so many of the changes in Salesforce have to go into a sandbox, and they have to be subject to rigorous regression testing. And that's the last point. So the Strongpoint approach, again, work is allocated more conscientiously, more participants in the process deliver greater productivity. And then the automated recommendations are absolutely trusted because they're done by a machine, and the machine is very thorough, which escalates the confidence. And this is what we're really trying to do. We're trying to escalate the confidence for team members to be able to make changes. The testing requirements are alleviated to much higher degrees, and response to opportunities are a lot more immediate. Therefore, true innovation is really delivered safely at far greater velocity. And that's the whole point. That's the idea. The icing on the cake is a rich set of dashboards and reports that prove that we've got governance. And so this continuous monitoring engine is based on the same indexing engine that does the initial index. All changes are automatically sniffed and assessed for compliance. Anything that's out of compliance is going to generate an alert, and then it's flagged and reports as compliant or not. So governance is achieved very, very quickly, very easily, without a whole lot of effort, human effort, automatically. And so again, any change that gets made to the metadata repository is detected. Automatically the policy is located, is approved, or it's not. If it's not, it's going to generate an alert. That message is going to get routed to the appropriate people, and then the changes can be remediated. So with that in mind, I'm going to kick into a demo, and the demo is actually going to be a little bit shorter than the presentation I just gave you, because it becomes very, very quick and easy to understand what's happening with Strongpoint. So for the sake of this demo, I'm going to act as an admin. I've had a user come to me, and they want to change the company social media source on the account object because they're doing a campaign, and they want to. And we don't have Reddit in that list of values yet, and we want to deprecate MySpace because we're no longer getting any leads from MySpace. So I'm going to go into the DRD, into the dependency relationship environment, and you can see very quickly that it's reading from the metadata. It'll take a second for it to read and render. And I'm going to open up the account object, and then I'm going to swim to the company social media attribute right here. Click on it. Immediately, you'll see some metadata. I know that this is a custom entity. I know that it belongs to a fellow named Brian Vera. I know it's a pick list, and it's been used recently. So because it's in play, because it's being used, I probably don't want to deprecate it. If I wanted to, I could actually open the record here, but before I do that, I want to just bring your attention to the fact that we can see all dependencies right here in a daisy chain out to the right. So if Strongpoint was handed this in the ICE application, it would do exactly what we're doing here. It would go through its list of criteria on policy, and it say, there are no red flags here. We've just got we've got a minor number of dependencies. Doesn't seem to be any technical risk, doesn't seem to be any organizational risk, doesn't seem to be any regulatory risk. We'll go ahead and give this one a log changes only, and we'll put it in play. By contrast, if I go down here to the maintenance type, same kind of thing. It's a pick list. It's owned by the same guy. It's also in play. But the first thing that we see is we've got an Apex class here associated with this. So automatically I hit the brakes because, oh my goodness, we've got some technical risk. If I open up the Apex class, however, I can see the sources, and I can see very quickly that there's a daisy chain effect here. So this is a pretty complicated change. However, this particular script hasn't been executed in over 2 years. So I might want to get back with the developer, Marlena, and say, can we deprecate this? Can we just alleviate this so that I can easily make this change? And I might get a yes or a no. But as I scroll down, I'll see that, oops, you know what? I don't want to do that. I don't want to commit to that just yet because the high valued customers report has some organizational risk associated with it. That report is run by the executive team every morning. And so we don't want to muck with that without getting their approval to change their report. And as I scroll further, I can see very quickly that the California customers report is also associated with this attribute, and that has the new California privacy stipulation on it. So before I can muck with that, I have to get approval from the CISO. So in this particular enhancement request, we've got, not only have we got technical risk, which we may or may not be able to deprecate very quickly, but we've also got organizational risk and some compliance concerns. And we haven't even finished scrolling down yet. Oops, wow, we've got some workflows. So we've got additional Apex classes in the form of workflows here that we want to go and look into. So, you know what, Strongpoint is probably, if Strongpoint was doing the assessment automatically rather than manually, Strongpoint would recommend this go for a full software lifecycle review. And so that is, what we just did is absolutely what Strongpoint does behind the scenes. So we did manually what starts with a process issue in the ICE application. So what happens within the application is an admin or a user goes into the system and effectively creates a scope and submits it to Strongpoint. And you can see in this case, the scope was customizations to an account controller in an Apex class. It was submitted. Strongpoint came back and said, hit the brakes. You get this big red alert, and it says, no, slow down. We've got to do a full software development lifecycle here. But if you look at some of the other cases, so that one's going to get routed to the technical team. But we've got this update the cancel services report, which it said is a log changes only. So we can go ahead and make that one. We can make that change right now in production because there's absolutely no technical responsibility there. There's no concern. We've got a couple that have been put into a change request. And so they're going to go into the change request queue. And in the change request queue, you can see very quickly the state of approval. And we can also do a whole bunch of other things. We can see the approvals that are required. We can see the deployment effort. We can do an impact analysis of what can or can't be safely modified. And here, what cannot be safely modified are, we're getting a warning based on these scripts. And then here's a list of the potentially impacted items. And then here's the inactive customizations on which there's none for this record. And then finally, because every one of our changes, our nominated changes, goes through this process, if we go in and we look at all change logs, we can very quickly see that all of them have green flags next to them, which means they're all compliant with the policy. And that's basically a quick overview of Strongpoint. And we hope you like it, and we look forward to hearing from you.